Dijeron igualdad, pero esta vez me separaron. Dijeron mucho, pero no se olvidaron de callarse. Cuánto odio por mi piel sembraron. Dijeron historia y la tergiversaron. Dijeron guerra, muerte, odio y nos culparon. Siempre. Enfermedades, epidemias nos contagiaron. Exterminación de mi fauna complace a tus mercados. Dijeron riqueza y todo se lo robaron. Oro, platino, diamante, a la fuerza se lo llevaron. Y la actualidad es tan triste que todo aquello que dijeron es lo mismo que hoy se dice más. ¿Quién dice, quién explota, quién se beneficia? El asesino, el mismo que da las noticias. Hay una cuenta fácil que siempre me da las grandes riquezas, de dónde vienen y hacia dónde van.
Independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao, independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao. Nati Dre es afroresistencia, cultura ancestral, afrodescendencia, solidaridad. Esa es la esencia, la diáspora africana eleva la conciencia, conciencia negra, universal, progresista y transcultural. Negros y mestizos revolucionando, pueblos caribeños y africanos en un solo bando. No más explotación, colonialismo interno, no más confusión, supremacía blanca en el Babilón. Soy rojo, negro y verde, afroliberación. Mientras más negro, más represión. Somos creadores, recupera tu visión. Mi misión es educar con amor, contra el silencio, vivo sin temor. Independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao, independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao.
Peace, what's going on? We are live and direct. It's the Rise Up International Morning Show. I am Kalanji Changa, alongside. Tell me your name, sir.
Isaac Jasper. You guys know who I am. What's going on, everybody? We're up early this morning.
Isaac's a star. He said, you guys know who I am. Isaac Jasper, you all know me. It's like I'm a movie star. I hear you, Big Isaac. Anyway, good to be on with you this early Tuesday morning. Yes. You know what I mean? We know a lot is going on overnight, over the weekend, this month, this year, this century. You know what I mean? Everything's wild. It's on fire. The world's on fire. You have things going on domestically. You have international conundrums and bullshit. Let me just say that for folks who are listening, you know, going on. And we're here to set the record straight. How have you been, Isaac? Man, I haven't seen you in a few ticks, man. You've been hiding or some shit. What's going on?
I love how you say that. And you actually have not been on the Rise Up show in a very long time. But nonetheless,
bringing up old stuff, Isaac.
I'm doing good. A lot of old stuff will be brought up today, nonetheless. But I wanted to, kind of, put myself in a position to piggyback off of what you were saying. Is there's a song, whether it's the Temptations, the Undisputed Truth, Ball of Confusion is what I think, is what we're in right now. Is we have individuals that think that, this fight isn't their fight, that the international conflicts that are going on will not affect them. And, a lot of that is fallacy. A lot of that is rooted in anti-intellectual understanding of the whole entire situation. So this is a ball of confusion for me. I can't really, for others say that, or put that in their mouth. But for me, it's a ball of confusion. And it has been for quite some time. I think, revolution, liberation, these words actually mean something to me. And I think that there are, certain institutions that, have misconstrued that, that narrative. A person that we have on today that will be joining us right now, very shortly, is an individual who puts the narrative where the narrative should be in regards to what's going on in West Asia, applying that to how that will affect the individuals here in what I call the occupied territories of Turtle Island, and has done that for a very long time, for a couple decades. And I've actually interviewed him on my network before, and it was a joy then, and I know today is going to be a very powerful conversation as we're going to start to again combat anti-intellectual behavior, combat extreme Zionism, combat imperialist narratives that we know that are funneled through colonial behavior. And so for us to be able to make that happen and to get the narratives correct, we are joined by none other than Miko Peled. So I want to bring Miko up to the stage. Hello, Miko. How are you doing?
Good morning. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's a joy, as always, to be in contact with you and to create some space. Again, you met Kalanji before we started recording. And we had emphasized that we wanted to start this conversation off, with a little bit of a history lesson for individuals, being that, this conflict did not start on October 7th, and me and you have gone over that. You've gone over that on a multitude of times. It's at this point feels like Groundhog's Day, if you could, and unfortunately I have to ask you to go through that same day over over and over. If you could, let's start with the history of Israel, its construction, and particularly being that you have our particular connection through its declaration. If we could start there, and how this isn't a colonial occupation nonetheless.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me. So I'll just maybe introduce myself briefly. My name is Miko Peled. I'm currently the founder and director of the Palestine House of Freedom in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, where we created a space that is unapologetically Palestinian, where we elevate Palestinian voices. We're like a conduit that takes the Palestinian voices that are not heard in Palestine and elevates them and expresses them as loud and as clear as we can. As a nonprofit, we're dedicated to education, and so our mission is to educate Americans, particularly, to the fact that a free Palestine from the river to the sea and the dismantling of the apartheid regime not only is not negative or anti-Semitic like the other side likes to claim, but is in fact the only hopeful, optimistic solution to Palestine, to the issue of Palestine, to the violence in the region, to the instability in the region. And of course, the problem in this country is that Americans receive a Zionist education, so they think it's okay to invest in the problem, the obstacle to peace, the obstacle to human rights, the obstacle to stability is the apartheid state. As long as there's an apartheid state, and we have a history of almost 100 years of violence that was initiated by the apartheid state. I mean, the attack on Iran is the latest. The genocide of the Palestinian people has been going on, like you said, long before October 7th of 2023. It's been going on for almost 100 years, and so on and so forth. So to that end, that we have a robust system that we're by which we want to educate Americans. So it's actually quite easy to describe what Zionism is, what the State of Israel is. The State of Israel was established based on an ideology called Zionism, which basically says that Jewish people all over the world have a right to come to Palestine and take it because they are somehow the descendants of a tribe that had lived there maybe 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. And therefore, Palestinians are aliens. The Palestinians are invaders. They have no rights. And that's what we've seen over the last 100 years. Because originally the Zionists were white Europeans, the powers that be at the time saw no problem with allowing white Europeans to take the country of people who are not white, kick them out, try to exterminate them, and allow them to establish this apartheid state, which gives rights to people like myself over Palestinians, or any actually Jewish person around the world over the Palestinians whose land this is. My grandfather was a leader in the Zionist movement in the early 20th century. He was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence of the apartheid state, of the State of Israel. My father As a young man, joined one of the Zionist terrorist organizations, became an officer, then became a career officer when the state was established in the army, and retired as a general after the 1967, after Israel, the assault of 1967, where Israel assaulted all of its neighbors once again and completed the occupation and the conquest of Palestine. So it doesn't take very long to summarize what Israel is and what Zionism is. It is a colonial project for sure. It's a settler colonial project for sure. It's not a country, and I tweeted that yesterday, and I'm getting a lot of shares. It's not the name of a country. The name of the country is Palestine. Israel is the name of the regime that has taken over Palestine. It's an apartheid regime. It's a genocidal regime. It's been engaged in apartheid and genocide. It has been accused by Amnesty International and other major organizations of committing the crime of apartheid, which is a crime against humanity, and the crime of genocide, which of course is also a crime against humanity. And I'll say one more thing, which is very interesting. The apartheid state in Palestine, the state of Israel, was established in 1948, only 3 years after the end of World War II, after the end of the genocide of Jews and so many others in Europe. And in those 3 years, the terms like crimes against humanity, genocide, these crimes were codified, were defined. In fact, the crime of genocide, the definition of the crime of genocide, was defined by Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish Jewish jurist. But within 3 years, they not only allowed but encouraged and supported the establishment of an apartheid state that immediately began the genocide of the Palestinian people. So they ended one very clearly. They brought down the Nazis, and then they allowed the Zionists to take over and commit these horrendous crimes against the Palestinian people within 3 years. I mean, that's a very short time. As these crimes, as people were just waking up to the fact that there are such things, that countries and states and regimes should be held accountable for these crimes, they allowed this crime to take place against the Palestinian people. And again, I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Palestinians are not white and they're not European, so they don't matter. And when the Zionists said, Christian Zionists said it first, and the Jewish Zionists said, that this is a land without a people for a people without a land, they knew there were people there. I mean, Palestine was of course inhabited by people. There was a culture, there was commerce. The Europeans, other countries, traded with Palestine. Palestine hit massive imports, a strong economy. It was a country. It was a country with a culture and a people, but they were not European, so they didn't matter. So when they say a country without a people, it means a country without a people that matter. A country without a people who are like us, who are white. And that's really what that means. And that's what we've been seeing over the last 100 years.
So, Miko, you mentioned, 77 years ago. Okay. Palestine was Christopher Columbus. Israelis discovered Palestine. They hijacked this nation, and they decided that we're going to stick our flag in it. But that wasn't the first choice. Palestine wasn't the first choice. Can you speak to that, but also speak to the role of the United States? Because you have folks now talking about, the United States has entered. They are now assisting Israel. Israel and the United States, they have a lot in common, but I would like to speak about this mutual aid and this support that is taking place over the past 77 years. And it's, this strange bedfellows, for lack of better words, when you have the U.S. and Israel over these past 77 years. So just starting with, the quote unquote, quote unquote 1948, when this invasion took place. Again, we know that wasn't the first choice. Can you speak to that? And I know I just asked you like 3 questions in one, but I got excited with the convo. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So in the early 20th century, the Zionists, or late 19th, early 20th century, the Zionists were debating where this idea of a Jewish state should take hold. So they threw Uganda, Argentina, someplace in Central Europe. But the one place that they agreed on, because they could make this false biblical connection, was Palestine, because Palestine, had a as the Jewish people had history in Palestine and so forth, and the Jewish scriptures talk about Palestine. Now, even though the Zionists were completely secular, in fact, they did everything they possibly could to disconnect themselves and disengage from traditional Jews and religious Jews. They wanted, and I said this one time to the wife of a rabbi. She laughed so hard she couldn't believe I said these words. They secularized the Jewish scriptures. They secularized the Bible. And so they said, well, the Bible is, all this God and religion stuff is nonsense. It's our history book. It's the history book of the Jewish people. So it's not a history book. Of course, it's a book of faith. And so you can't call it history. But it was very successful, that claim. And so they said, number one, the Jewish people, or the people of Israel, which is a term used to describe the Jewish people who are of the faith, Jewish faith, not a nation in the modern sense. They said, no, we're not a religious minority. We are a nation like all other nations. Then they said, our history book is the Bible, so here we go. And they still say today, I mean, even the most secular Israelis say, the Bible gave us the land, or God gave us the land, even though they don't believe in God. And then the third thing they said was the Palestine is our homeland. So the homeland, a nation, and a story, which is not really history. It's a book, based on a book of faith. And that's how they came up with this, with the idea that Palestine is the right place. And it sold really well because at the time they were talking to people who were quite happy, Christian, Protestants, Europeans, deeply racist, who really bought into that narrative, who liked that narrative. And so then they supported them. So initially it was the British, of course. Then gradually it switched from the British to the Americans as America became, the empire, the main empire. So that was the process, and that is how it took hold. And again, to this day, I mean, I was talking to friends who, Black Americans who remember going to church and seeing the Israeli flag in church and thinking that it was some kind of a Christian symbol. They had no idea that it was the flag of another country. Nobody told them as kids, So this narrative, and it's all about marketing, really. This narrative took hold so well among Christians, and that's how Christian Zionism actually preceded Jewish Zionism. But of course, this kind of summed it all up. It really cemented this idea that all Jewish people need to go to Palestine because the Bible says so, even though the Bible doesn't really say so. But that's kind of the narrative. And like I said, to this day, I don't know, Ted Cruz, I mean, all kinds of people who had nothing to do with the place, ignorant people, say, well, it's in the Bible. God said we have to support. And again, they conflate the term, the people of Israel, which again is a term that is used to describe the Jewish faith. And Jews were always a religious minority everywhere throughout the world, in the Middle East, in Asia, of course, in Europe, and so on, with modern Israel, which, of course, is an aberration and has nothing to do with Judaism. In fact, it contravenes Jewish law, the creation of the state of Israel. So that was the process. That's how they ended up with this, and that's how we ended up with where we are today. And again, the support, because initially the Zionists were white Europeans, then I always say, there's this thing called you may have heard of the Balfour Declaration, where the Balfour, who was the Secretary of State or the Foreign Minister in Britain at the time, gave a promissory note to a Jewish millionaire by the name of Rothschild, saying that the British government welcomes the idea, or supports the idea of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And basically, it's one white racist giving another white racist a country that belongs to people who are not white. And in those days, this is the early 20th century, nobody thought there was anything wrong with that. But that was exactly the process.
Wow.
Yeah. A lot of history was just given to us right there in regards to how we've gotten to this point. Give me 1 second. I got some background noise. My bad.
While he's handling the background noise, you mentioned the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was, I believe, 1917, around World War I, if I'm not mistaken. What took so long for that? This whole conquering and and for things to take effect, because you went from this was around World War I, and this was right after World War II, when you talk about the founding, excuse me, or the creation of this particular state? What do you think what took so long for that to really transpire and take place?
Well, first of all, Jews didn't accept Zionism. The vast majority of Jews thought the Zionists were crazy. To pick up and leave their countries, their culture, their language, their and go to Palestine. Why would they want to do that? So the Zionists had two challenges. One is to convince the powers that be to give them that land. The other one is to convince Jewish people that this was actually a viable thing. In 1948, when the state of Israel was actually established, there were only about 500,000 Jews living there, and maybe about 1.5 million or so Palestinians. So Jews weren't coming. Jews weren't buying this. And even today, most Jewish people don't live there. Even the ones who define themselves as Zionists will send money or send other people's children there, but they won't go. I mean, it was an insane idea. Jewish people, and according to Jewish law, in those days, there was still a very large Orthodox, observant Jewish communities in Europe. This is before World War II, before the Nazis. It contravenes Jewish law. Jewish scripture prohibits Jewish people from sovereignty in the Holy Land. That's why you have, when you go to protests, even today, you see a contingent of ultra-Orthodox Jews saying, no. First of all, Zionism is not Jewish. And number two, it contravenes Jewish law. It's against the Jewish law for Jews to claim sovereignty in the Holy Land. They can go there to worship and so forth, but they have to be good citizens to whoever is the government there, and it should not be a Jewish government. So that's how this transpired. But it took a lot. It took the Holocaust. Then after World War II, still, like I said, most Jews didn't want to go. So then what they did was they were hoping that after World War II, survivors would come, and very few survivors of the Holocaust came. Out of some 2 million survivors who were in camps, internment camps after World War II, a fraction maybe came. Maybe just a small percentage of Jews who were survivors came, and many of the ones who came were forced to come one way or the other and then left because they hated it. And so, in fact, I just co-produced a movie about a person like that. We call it The Orphan, who was forced to go to Palestine and couldn't wait to leave, and he describes what Palestine was like in those years. But so then they said, well, they're not getting the wealthy European Jews. They're not getting the survivors. They're not getting the white wealthy people that they wanted. American Jews had no interest in going to Palestine. So they said, well, let's try and get the Arab Jews. Now, granted, the Arab Jews are lesser, of lesser value. They're not civilized. They're not white. They don't understand. But they went on a campaign, which included a great deal of violence, to bring the Jews from the Arab world, so all over North Africa, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and so on. And so they even went as far as putting bombs in synagogues in Iraq and Baghdad. And that's a great book about that. But anyway, so then they brought these Jews, but then they put them in concentration camps, treated them like white European street people who are not white, with contempt, denied them education, denied them possibilities, threw them out there in places that the white Europeans didn't want to go. And that's how you ended up having, Arab Jews come to Palestine and become Israelis. But it took a very long time to convince Jewish people that this idea of Zionism had any viability, had any legitimacy. And it still really didn't work. Like I said, most Jews don't live there.
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring that up because, Malcolm X talked about this in Zionist Logic in regards to the fallacy of this occupation over, Palestinians, is that, if this is the case, then, this justifies the Moors invading Spain at that point when he wrote this. It shows direct connections to colonial projects. It is a colonial project, being that in the 1950s we see immediately, Truman come into place and say, "Hey, we declare Israel a state." That was not because they wanted a safe haven for Jews, and I don't want to take someone's words or what they were saying. I want to repurpose them. In the same way as Shahid Bolson would say, and I have my disagreements, I have my, agreements with him, but nonetheless, what was stated in his analysis of Israel and of the West is that you're not you don't want Jews to be safe, because if you did, then you would make them safe in the areas that they're actually from. Economically speaking, this makes sense for capitalism. This makes sense for imperialism, the expansion and the exposure of annihilation in terms like that have to be used in order to try and justify the expansion of colonial behavior. What you guys have, what you described, the questions that have been asked, for those that, are watching right now, this is just even a small smidge of the history of the egregious nature of Israel. Is that they have created, I heard without you, referencing it, neo-colonialism. When you take individuals and apply colonial nature to them, and then that gets reinforced into oppressing other people, it is to keep that ball of confusion that I was talking about earlier. It's to keep that going. And I love that you say that we are taught here in the West Zionist rhetoric in schools, education systems. It festers all throughout the government, institutions for education, all of that. And my next question to you is that along with the Zionist rhetoric, can you also talk to the Islamophobic rhetoric that is then also applied through this colonial agenda, is to be Islamophobic to individuals that have done nothing wrong other than simply living, simply being who they are.
Sure. Well, I just want to reiterate a point that you made in this movie that we made, that I mentioned, that we co-produced, the Orphan. The gentleman that the movie's about, Jacques Boudet, is a Belgian Holocaust survivor, and he says they're telling us that to prevent another genocide of the Jewish people, we have to go kill the Palestinians. He goes, if we want to prevent a genocide, all we have to do is be human. We have to educate people to be human. We have to educate people to be tolerant and respect other people, not go and create this militaristic entity in somebody else's country. I'm sorry, I forgot, what was the question again? I lost the
just how along with the Zionist agenda, we're also taught an Islamic, Islamophobic agenda as well.
Well, so one of the problems the Zionists had is that Jews lived very well in the Muslim and Arab world for a very long time. The Arab Jews thought Zionism was a crazy European idea, had nothing to do with them. Iraqi Jews were proud Iraqis, Syrian, Egyptian, Moroccan, Libyan Jews were proud to be who they were and proud to be Arab and so forth. So how do you combat that? So you have to create the enemy. You have to paint the picture of the enemy. And the Zionists, they don't rest. They work very, very hard on their campaigns, on their marketing, and I hate to say it, they do a very good job. They're very effective. And so the next enemy has to be Arabs, and then the next enemy beyond that has to be Muslims, because these are people who that very naturally and very understandably would support Palestine and support the Palestinians and stand against this settler colonial project, which is basically a racist European project. And so we have to create that enemy. So they did a very good job in now portraying not only Arabs but Muslims as these crazed, irrational, hate-filled terrorists. And you see it, and look. I don't have to tell you this, but if you look around, look at movies, look at popular culture, look at politics. Look everywhere you look, you see Arabs and you see Muslims portrayed as irrational, crazy, violent people, and it took hold. It's very successful. The second book I wrote, Injustice: The Story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. They came against what was the largest and most respected Muslim relief organization in America, the Holy Land Foundation. They started coming out against them in the early 1990s. And by 2009, they shut it down, declared it a terrorist organization, and put 5 of the finest men I've ever met in federal prison. 2 of them for 65 years. That's what's called the Holy Land Foundation 5. There were 5 men. That was part of that campaign, to bring down anything that portrays Islam, Palestine, Arabs in general in a positive light. And they've been very successful, to the point where now if you say free Palestine, they say it's anti-Semitic. If you say the word justice, it's anti-Semitic, because anything that comes from that, certainly if you were, if you're covered, if you're a woman and you're covered, you wear a hijab, or if you're a man with a beard, with a beard, or you go to the mosque, then you must be, a suspect. So the Zionists did a very good job in kind of injecting that fear virus, not only into Israelis, and then trying to the larger Jewish community around the world, but now even to Americans in general. And there's a story I'll tell you real quick. There's a really well-known anti-Zionist rabbi who lives in London. His name is Elchanan Beck, Rabbi Beck. And he says, I've lived in London almost my entire life. I don't know what a British soldier looks like. I've never seen one. He says, my kids have never seen a gun. He says, we have the Stamford Hill is the large Jewish community in neighborhood in London. He says, all of our neighbors are Muslims and Arabs. We send our kids with the cabs, with drivers who are Muslims and Arabs. We don't even think about it as a problem. We don't have these fears. And somebody wants to tell me that I'll be safer in that place that they called Israel, where you see soldiers and guns and violence everywhere all the time. And he's right. As a kid, I knew all the names of all the ranks and all the different corps in the military and what the guns look like as a kid, before I could even, read or write. And he says, and somebody wants to tell me that I'm safer there than I am here in London, and so when you break down these ridiculous claims that lead to the fear and hatred of Muslims, that lead to the fear and hatred of people of color in general, when you break them down, you see just how absurd they are and how racist and stupid they are.
We definitely appreciate you laying it out so eloquently. At this point, we'll be joining us on the platform is no stranger to this platform. He's been MIA on this platform. We don't know where he's been, but we found him today. He's the national organizer for Black Alliance for Peace. He's a former candidate for vice president of the Green Party. He's a revolutionary, someone that we've been knowing for quite some time. We want to bring to the stage brother Ajamu Baraka. How you doing today, Ajamu?
I'm so happy that you found me. I was missing in action until you dug me up, and when you told me that my friend Miko was going to be on this show, I said, look, I want to come in early so we could connect, because I've been thinking about you, brother, because your folks have gone nuts, and everybody is kind of in danger, and everybody who is trying to bring a different perspective to these conflicts, they're facing some significant repression. So I'm glad to see you still safe and doing the work. And I just wanted to just say a shout out to you and share a few minutes with you.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you again, my friend. It's great to see you again.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes. Since we have both of you on the screen at the same time, which is great, and we appreciate you both coming on somewhat last minute. With all the things that's going on, home and abroad, shall we say? I guess when I'm saying home, I'm thinking about the Sahel somewhere, but here in the United States and abroad. One of the things that Miko mentioned a few seconds ago in the Ajamu, we've been talking about the history of Zionism. We haven't gotten into the Israeli-Iran conundrum just yet. But we've been talking about the history of Zionism, and Miko, broke it down because, as Ajamu, here at Black Power Media, sometimes we take for granted that everyone knows everything. And of course, none of us know everything. But Miko mentioned the term anti-Semitic. And that is a term that has been thrown around whenever, anyone, as Miko pointed out, questions Zionism. Whenever they question oppression, they say, okay, well, you're being anti-Semitic. It's been a go-to term. So I would really appreciate, and I think the audience would as well, a response on what anti-Semitism is, because I think that sometimes there's a disagreement in regards to, you know, what would be considered a Semite and what anti-Semitism is. So if you all would take a crack at it, either one of you or both, I think that that would be something good, and you know, I think we would appreciate it.
I defer to Miko, but I will come in and talk about, for example, the recent statement that we issued from the Black Alliance of Peace on an element of that statement dealt with this issue of anti-Semitism.
You know, it's anti-Semitism used to be a term used to describe racism that targets Jewish people. What the Zionists did is they turned it into a term that describes a racism of a higher order. You know what I mean? If you're a racist against Jewish people, well, now that is much more serious than if you're just a racist. And then what they did beyond that is they conflated racism against Jews with rejecting Zionism, which is a racist ideology. So because they faced an issue where the very ideology upon which the apartheid state of Israel was built is a racist ideology, they went ahead and, to my surprise, very successfully created what they call a new definition of anti-Semitism, which is really convoluted, but includes aspects of rejecting Zionism, rejecting the state of Israel, criticizing, you know, they created something that's very confusing. So people will be afraid to say anything because they're not really sure what the definition is. So they created this absurd reality where if you reject an ideology that is inherently racist and violent, which is what Zionism is, now you are a racist, you're anti-Semitic. You know, sometimes I look at this thing, I think we've all lost our minds. I mean, people have completely lost their minds. You know, to say that is anti-Semitic, that rejecting that kind of racism. But again, for them, racism against Jews is a racism of higher order. It's worse than being racist, you know, in general. And that's where we are today, where it's been completely, you know, they've created confusion. But anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism. Now, if we want to go into who Semites are, not Semites are, you know, I don't know that is really a relevant argument, because it was accepted that anti-Semitism, that Jews are somehow Semites, even though if you look at me, there's not a Semitic gene in my gene pool. There's not a Semitic cell in my body. You know, where I come from European, you know, my family came from Europe. But the point is that, you know, okay, Jews were Semites, and therefore, you know, racism against Jews is called anti-Semitism, whatever. But the problem is what they did today with it.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, this became a hustle. Unfortunately, as serious as anti-Semitism really is, it became a hustle by Zionists to, in fact, intimidate people into silence or outright support. We take the position that because anti-Semitism is important, because it is a part of the white supremacist arsenal, that as anti-colonialists, as groups that are opposed to all forms and expressions of white supremacy, we have to be opposed to anti-Semitism. And we connect, because we know the history too. We know that basically, you know, with the Holocaust, with the targeting of Jews during the first fascist period in Europe, that this was, you know, these were the others, the racialized others, if you will. Okay, and so we connect up the fact that anti-Semitism is a manifestation and expression of white supremacy. That's why we are principally committed to opposing it in all its manifestations. And the fact of the matter is that we connect that also to the fact that we see Zionism as a white supremacist ideology, and why we are compelled, therefore, to oppose Zionism. And so we reject and we criticize, in our last commentary, we said very clearly that we oppose this anti-Semitic conflation of Zionism with the state of Israel and with Jewish values. That is the ultimate insight, ultimate insult, if you will, to suggest that this crazed movement, and in particular this right-wing and crazed administration that has power in Israel today, represents Jewish values, is absurd. It's almost like saying that in some ways the nationalist Christian right in the U.S. represents Christianity. I mean, it's absurd. So, I think, but one of the consequences of the last couple of years is that for the general public, in particular in the West and specifically in the U.S., they've been sort of subjected to a master class, if you will, in what is Zionism. And as a consequence, unfortunately for the leaders in Israel, people have begun to understand just how nefarious that movement has become or is. And that is really one of the elements that has generated the opposition to it and given courage to people to oppose it more openly than they could have and did over the last few decades. So it, to me, is a positive component. It's really strange and mysterious in some ways that here you have these young people in the forefront of this opposition on these college campuses, with a significant, or if not majority, of these young people being anti-Zionist Jews, but yet they are being characterized as anti-Semitic. But that hustle, as I referred to, no longer has the kind of power that it had before, and as a consequence, we're seeing a real shift in awareness, a real shift in consciousness, and that's a good thing.
Yes. First off, I just want to say one to both of you guys. Thank you for joining us. To have these conversations, I think most importantly is the important thing that we need to be doing is reinforcing the narratives. This question is for both of you guys, and it's going to transition us into what we're going into today. We have a large amount of individuals that say that what's going on internationally is not our problem, from the African masses of people to individuals from what would be classified as a Latino community, indigenous communities here in the occupied territories of Turtle Island, and new African territory, that say that we should not be caring about what's going on internationally as if it does not affect us here domestically. I'd like to, ask the question to, well, what do you guys say to that? And two, how can you guys explain how we are connected to what's going on? Imperialism affects us all, and we're at a point in a stage where, as Ajamu stated, we're seeing a higher level of consciousness take effect, and we're seeing anti-Semitism in its real definition be used, and then also at the same time be manipulated and misconstrued to co-opt millions of people into believing into an ideology. So I'll leave that to whoever wants to answer that question, how we're connected and how this is not a separate a conflict, where this is an interconnected situation.
I'd rather hear what you have to say, Ajamu, first.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, you all might recall when Charlemagne the God was interviewing Joe Biden, and Joe Biden intimated that if that Charlemagne was not black because he wasn't openly supporting his candidacy. I'm going to take a similar kind of track. That basically, this notion that this has nothing to do with black folks, I think, is a reflection of the degree in which there's been a redefinition of what is black, if you will. Because I would argue that has nothing to do with the traditional positions of our movement and of our people. We've always sided with the oppressed. We've always understood that we have an affinity, a common interest with all people who are being exploited and oppressed. powerful forces, even if we didn't always identify specifically what those forces were. That this undermining of that kind of moral position is part of the counter-revolutionary experience we've been subjected to for the last 50 or so years, that has resulted in the successful transformation of our people into quote unquote Americans, with that same kind of insulated and anti-human kind of framing of these kinds of events. We are human beings. And the fact that we can watch a live stream genocide being carried out and being supported by the same forces that mass incarcerate us in the United States, that shoot us down in the streets through the instrumentality of their domestic army that we refer to as the police, that can deny us the ability to live dignified lives where we have Social Security, real lifelong Social Security and dignity with housing and healthcare and education, to conclude that this struggle of the Palestinian people against the same forces have nothing to do with us is absurd. But we don't condemn the people for being absolutely confused. Again, this is a part of a process. And it just really reflects the kind of work that we have to do politically to reverse these kinds of misperceptions, this kind of erosion of our morality. So no, the rage by ICE against Latinos is part of our struggle, because that's part of the ongoing militarization of our communities, the terror that people are now subjected to, because kids are scared to go to school. Kids scared to go to school. People are scared to go to work because of the fear that if they come home, their parents may not be there, or the parents are afraid that if they go to work, they may end up being deported themselves. So we're human beings. We're human beings, and basically, this is not a black position. That is some kind of white supremacist framing, and we completely reject that. Plus, lastly, part of the mission of the Black Alliance of Peace is to revive, if you will, the traditional Black internationalism that's been at the core of our people's struggle. We connect up the world. We understand that you can't talk about liberation in the U.S. and not talk about Palestine, not talk about what's happening or what happened in Libya, not understand the Ukrainian war. These are all connected up to one global system, and that understanding has to be at the core of our understanding of the world in order to shape the kind of politics that need to be shaped and created so we can more effectively oppose these oppressive forces.
Ajamu, to your point real quick, and I'm gonna let Miko take it, but he said we don't condemn the people for being absolutely confused. It is a process. As the young folks would say, that was bars. You know what I mean? Because I think that so often we do condemn the people, you know what I'm saying, for what they don't know, as if this wasn't a concerted effort, as if this wasn't a process that has lasted for centuries. So I appreciate that. Miko, what's your take on that?
First of all, I have to say, Ajamu, that was brilliant. Thank you for that. That was a great.
He left you no crumbs at all.
One little crumb, one little thought. I think that the kind of the micro of this macro. If we look at what's happening in Palestine now, okay, the apartheid state decided to wage war against Iran. So the Iranians are retaliating, and there's rockets flying and people being hurt and so much damage and so on. I've not heard a single Palestinian being interviewed. Now, the majority of the people who live in historic Palestine between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea are Palestinians. They have no shelters. In fact, what they've done over the last year and a half, they've increased the number of home demolitions from thousands per year to tens of thousands. So Palestinians don't have even a home, let alone a shelter. Shelters exist in the Israeli settlements, They do not exist. So you've got 2 million Palestinians who are so-called citizens of the state of Israel. None of their cities and towns have homes. Now, they live in very close proximity to the settlements. They live in very close proximity to where these rockets from Iran are falling. Now, the reason I bring it up is because Palestinians, has nothing to do with the Palestinians. Palestinians did not wage war against Iran, right? Israel did. This apartheid genocidal regime did it. And Palestinians are paying the price because they have no way to hide and find shelter from these rockets. So there's 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel. We know what's happening to the over 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza death camp. And then there are another 3.5 or so Palestinians who live in what used to be the West Bank, but really just ghettos. And they have nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, nowhere to go, nowhere to find shelter. So again, this has nothing to do with them, but they are victims of this, through no fault of their own. And I think this speaks to the fact that people, the oppressed are suffering from this sort of thing. They have no say, they have no voice, nobody cares, nobody asks them how they're doing. Again, I haven't heard. I mean, I'm in touch with my brothers and sisters, my Palestinian brothers and sisters, and this old lady who I know, wonderful old lady. When the bombs fall, she runs to stand under the staircase. When the sirens come on, they got nowhere to go. People with children, they got nowhere to hide, nowhere to protect themselves. So this colonial, I don't even know what to call it, racist genocidal regime is wreaking havoc in the region, destabilizing the region, putting people's lives in danger, but they're only protecting their own. They're only providing shelters and so forth for their own. I think this demonstrates exactly why we are in one way we're interconnected, and another way, who the people that are really actually paying the price for this sort of misadventure.
Yeah.
Right now.
Go ahead, Kalandri. Sorry.
No, because I know Miko, he may be pressed for time somewhat. Okay. I don't know how much time he has, but I want to get into, what's taking place right now. Of course, we've seen what took place last October. Was it October 7th? We remember that situation. And of course, everyone, blame the Palestinians. It's like, we can't believe what's going on, so on and so forth. But we know, that was a crock. We're looking at what took place. Of course, the world knows that, Israel attacked Iran last week. We know that the U.S. has stepped in, so on and so forth. Let's talk about that. What is this conundrum? What is it about? Because folks are confused. You got people running around screaming, "Oh no, World War III is about to pop off." Folks are saying that the U.S. has entered. Of course, the U.S. has always been on the scene. I mentioned it earlier. I don't think we dealt with an earlier question around the funding of Israel. I want to, at this time, give us an analysis of what's really going on in this particular conflict, because again, we're getting, we got Fox News, we have mainstream media, we have corporate media, etc. What's really happening right now between Israel and Iran? And, either one of you can start it.
Go ahead, Ajamu.
Well, I saw briefly. I won't go as long as I did the last time. But basically, what we have is a manifestation, a new stage in the struggle for U.S. global hegemony, and specifically the hegemony question in West Asia, or what people refer to as the Middle East, using and working through Fort Israel to manifest that. The crisis that global capital is facing, the question of legitimacy within the U.S. domestically, politically, and the lack of constraints that we see emanating from the international community has emboldened a strategy on the part of the U.S. state in which they have decided that they're going to embrace militarism in order to put a break on their declining hegemony, in order to advance themselves where they see the strategic opportunities existing. And that's what they in fact see in West Asia. That this conflict that they have been agitating for decades, they saw as a historic opportunity, beginning with the linchpin of all of this, and that is the assault by Israel on Gaza, and with the feckless lack of leadership coming from the Biden administration, and even when the Biden administration mildly tried to push back a little bit on the neocons and the other elements supporting Israeli expansionism, the result was that he was deposed, basically. And so we see that they have seen, or they have concluded, they have an opportunity to realize all of the objectives of a greater Israel, and to remove the only nation that had the possibility of putting some break on those ambitions.
Oh, dang.
Ajamu looks like he's having some issues.
They got him, you guys. No, I'm just I'm just playing.
Miko, you want to jump in while Ajamu
Sure.
gets correct?
Sure. Well, I'll go back to October 7th, 2023, because there's a lot of confusion as to what happened. And the way I see it, Ajamu's back. You want to finish your thought?
Well, I'm not sure where it cut off. See, I think us together, comrade, is a little bit too much for some forces, probably. So, so I was concluding by saying basically this is where we are, and this is where, and we could continue to talk about that. I'm not sure where it stopped, but I'll stop there.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say October 7th, 2023. A group of fighters from one of the most oppressed, surveilled, and hungry, for lack of a better word, spaces on Earth came out, without warplanes or helicopters or tanks, with meager means. This is a country, they came from a place where a glass of water is a luxury. A glass of clean water is a luxury. I'm talking about pre-October 7th. A clean glass of water was a luxury. You wouldn't imagine finding half a bottle of water that somebody would throw away. It was a luxury where a child with a simple infection could die. And they came out from that place, and they managed to completely paralyze the apartheid state, to create such chaos that to this day, the apartheid state, the state of Israel, has not recovered. And now, of course, we're always being asked to condemn them, and I always say, condemn them for what? So now we've seen this, historically for a very long time. Any Arab or Muslim country that stood with Palestine, that rejected Zionism, that refused to normalize, ended up in rubble. We saw Libya, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Iran stood firm. Iran stood firm to this day, supporting the Palestinians, supporting the call for justice, rejecting the entire Zionist project and this entire racist project. And by the way, we talked about Islamophobia earlier, and the hatred and racism against Muslims. This is part of the reason. How do you undermine a place like Iran? And so Iran has always been a great target, because every time some Israeli prime minister wanted to shift attention away, and I'm talking about going back decades, from their crimes against the Palestinians, and particularly in the Gaza concentration camp, they point to Iran. And how many times have we seen Israeli prime ministers in the UN and God knows where on mainstream media and so on, pointing to Iran and the nuclear threat? And then the whole world would shift their attention from these horrendous crimes, from this genocide, this unspeakable torture of an entire people, the Palestinian people, and look at Iran. And then it would go away and life would continue. This time, they did something I didn't think they were crazy enough to do, which actually attack Iran militarily, openly. And I think they miscalculated. I think the price that they're going to pay is far worse than anything they imagined. But again, it's that kind of a thing. It's a smokescreen. So now, I don't know how many, 100, 200, 300 Palestinians are being killed in the Gaza, and we don't know how many are dying. We know how many are being killed like actively by Israeli bullets. We don't know how many children are dying from infection, from dehydration, from starvation, babies dying. I mean, this is a horrendous reality, right? In the Gaza death camp and throughout all of Palestine, to be honest. The situation is horrendous. The genocide is taking place all over Palestine. Everybody's focusing on this new shiny thing, which is the attack on Iran and new nuclear weapons. Yes, nuclear weapons, no nuclear weapons, completely irrelevant conversation when there's this genocide going on. And we're replacing the regime. The regime that needs to be replaced is the apartheid regime. The regime that is creating that is destabilizing and has been destabilizing and has been engaged in violence for certainly 8 decades, but I would argue even more, is the apartheid regime. That's the regime that has to be replaced. You get rid of that, now you're going to have stability, but no. And so now this madness of attacking Iran took place, again, because number one, they need a smokescreen, and number two, the larger picture here and the U.S. supporting this and everything is because they dare to challenge the empire, they dare to challenge Zionism, they dare to support the Palestinian people, in every possible way. And so that's why they have to be punished, and that's why they're not, But again, it goes back to this inherently Eurocentric, racist rhetoric that people here bought into because we hear it everywhere. And like Ajamu was saying, you can't blame people for being confused and ignorant because the barrage of misinformation is overwhelming. So that's where we are, and that's what's taking place now. But I'll say it again, I didn't think that they were crazy enough, not the Americans and not the Israelis, to really wake up that tiger, because I think the price that is going to be paid, and again, the Iran historically has been acting with great restraint, and they've been acting responsibly, and I think that perhaps they confused the restraint and the responsibility of the Iranians with weakness. And they're going to find out that they miscalculated. I have no doubt that they're going to find out that they miscalculated.
I'm sorry.
My bad, Kalanji. I was just going to say, I've been reading this book called Arrogance of Power, and it speaks directly to what's going on right now, the arrogance of the West, trying to purposely mistaken Iran and other powerhouses out there as paper tigers when they have utilized educationally the process of knowing how to cripple the U.S. economic system without having to drop a bomb on people. And I think that also falls in the line of like xenophobia, Islamophobia, is that you really think that these individuals, the first thing that they're thinking of is dropping a bomb on somebody, when in the actual fact, the U.S., that's the first thing that they do. They don't know diplomacy. The diplomacy that they know only works to further expand imperialism. That's the only diplomacy that they understand. At least to what I feel they understand. I know that, I don't know how much time you do have left, Miko, but I wanted to ask you one final question, at least for myself, and maybe, Ajamu can answer this as well. Going back to what you were talking about, you didn't really think that they were, and I'm just going to use this for lack of better terms, that the U.S. was stupid enough to go and create a massive attack that inevitably did not cripple the nuclear facilities that they were targeting. Could you speak to that arrogance that then is masked with an uber amount of indoctrination? For those that aren't aware, Iran is not for any person who reads up on military history, reads up on geography, it is not the place that you want to be in any type of warfare. And most importantly, it is a Tehran, you know, the region of it itself, the how Iran is built is crazy. I mean, you know, you can only give that to the creators for what they were able to do with the mountain ranges and how they're you know, how it was constructed. Can you just, the arrogance of this, what is to come is unknown, but I do know that they're principled enough to not, you know, invoke nuclear war on the whole entire globe.
Yeah, I think the whole bomb issue is a joke. I mean, you either support non-proliferation across the board, or you sit down and shut up. It's certainly a country that refuses to be subjected to inspections, and a second country that actually dropped nuclear bombs on human beings, have no right to speak about, you know, about this. And, you know, the choice for non-proliferation was there. And if they decide that that's not the way to go, then any country and everybody's going to have nuclear bombs. And it's up to the Iranian people whether or not they should develop that or not. But I think it's just an excuse. I think that's the smokescreen. I think the real issue here is the larger issue that we discussed earlier. And the stupidity, you know, arrogance, hubris, stupidity, that's how empires fall. That's what brings down empires. When you perhaps, you know, historically you look back and you can see the signs, you know, but suddenly an empire will fall. People say, oh my God, I couldn't believe that happened. Well, you know, this is exactly, it's the hubris, it's the racism, and it's definitely the stupidity. And you mentioned Paper Tiger, you know, what the Palestinians were able to do on October the 7th of 2023, which by the way was exactly 50 years and 1 day after the beginning of the 1973 October War, where Syria and Egypt, weren't able to cause that much damage, but they did the same thing, you know, and the hubris and stupidity and racism of the Zionist regime fell into a trap. Of course, the Palestinians were much more effective. And basically what they showed, not for the first time, but really on an enormous scale, is that the entire military and intelligence apparatus, which people here like to adore so much, is nothing but a paper tiger, because it collapsed. It completely collapsed, you know, on October the 7th of 2023, to a point where the chaos and the paralysis that still exists within the apartheid state was devastating. And then you add to that the fact that the Yemeni forces were supporting them in closing access to basically the Suez Canal, and the Lebanese forces from the north. You know, it was chaos. I mean, the settlers and again, this now is continuing. And now the Iranian parliament decided to close the Straits of Hormuz, which is going to affect everybody, because it's going to affect so much of the oil that comes out of the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf. So yeah, it's stupidity, and that's how empires fall, and that's really all it is: stupidity, racism, and hubris. That's exactly what this is. And I think attacking Iran, you know, like I'm saying, it's a bridge too far. I don't think they're going to be able to handle this.
No doubt. You're checking out Black Power Media. This is the Rise Up International Morning Show. We want to thank Miko for joining us this morning. We don't want to cut into his time anymore. Miko's like, look, I told y'all 5 minutes. We've been on here for like 3 hours. But we definitely appreciate you coming through and being so brave, because of the fact that, you know, just due to your family history alone, you're talking about your grandfather signing the Declaration, and you know, your father's role, so on and so forth. And for you to stand up here, I imagine that the Zionists are not a fan of yours, and I'm sure you being seen with this with the notorious Ajamu Baraka on the screen together. I could imagine that your popularity rating has just went up.
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you, gentlemen. And Ajamu, seeing you this morning, it really made my day. So let's stay in touch.
Same here.
No doubt.
Same here. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Take it easy, Miko.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, we're going to go to a quick Rise Up International break, a Black Power break, and we're going to come back with our brother Ajamu, because of the fact that, you know, we need to really dig in, because I know that he's been putting out some real powerful information. In fact, you know, one of the things that Ajamu, I want to give you credit for is we actually text the morning of this assault. Ajamu was like, look, you know this shit ain't gonna last no 2 weeks. What Trump's talking about, it's gonna be sooner. And I'd be damn if Ajamu must have had the bat phone, because like 2 hours later, it's like it's going down. Anyway, we're gonna go to this quick rise up break, and we're gonna come back with Ajamu Baraka. Isaac, you all right over there? It looked like you tired.
I mean, I'm a nobody. I'm sitting here with Ajamu and with Kalanji, and I was on with Miko Peled. I'm having a wonderful day. The only thing I'm missing is an extra cup of coffee. That is all. So
knock it off, man. Anyway, you checking out the Rise Up International Morning Show. Y'all stick around. We're gonna give y'all like 3 minutes. We're gonna give Ajamu time, get his coffee, whatever he need to do. I think we're gonna come in with a little bit of Amos Wilson, if that's all right. Rise Up International Morning Show, Black Power Media. Here we go.
Most people, when we say Afro-American, they think only of the Negroes in the United States. But they don't realize that 2/3 of Brazil consists of people of African blood, which means they're also Afro-American because Brazil is in South America. And in all of these, many of these countries in South America and Central America, and even in Canada, they are heavily populated with people whose ancestors came from Africa. So when you total up the number of Afro-Americans, real Afro-Americans, in the Western Hemisphere, there are perhaps 100 million. And if these people ever unite among themselves, not only is it necessary for the Afro-Americans in the United States to be organized, but it's also necessary for the Afro-Americans in the Caribbean, or the Afro-Cubans, the Afro-Brazilians. It's necessary for all of them to be organized. And then once they are organized in each place, we have to organize among ourselves so that the Afro-American in the United States will be working in conjunction in a coordinated program with those who are in Cuba, and those in Brazil, and those in Venezuela, and those throughout the Caribbean, in Haiti, and in the West Indian Islands. And in this way, we actually get strength. And it's not an accident that there's no organization existing in the Western Hemisphere that's designed toward that end. It would be a direct threat to imperialism as it really exists, and to colonialism as it exists in the West. And one of the things that's going to help to bring this about is the independence of Africa. And one of the only reasons that we in the West have never organized, we have hated our image and our African image. And because Africa has been in the hands of people who have created an image of Africa that's negative and hateful. And it has been hateful to us. We haven't wanted to identify with it. But now that Africa is getting independent and in a position to create its own image, and it's a positive image, those of us in the West look at the African image and see how positive it is, and we begin to identify with it. We become proud of Africa, and we become proud of our African blood, our African heritage. And this is what is beginning to make the Africans in the Western Hemisphere today develop more race pride. And as this race pride develops, then it has a tendency to make us want to unite together and work together. And your Western imperialists and colonialists consider this to be a grave threat. More threat than communism or Marxism or socialism or anything else. The Africanism is what they consider to be the real threat.
Checking out the Rise Up International Morning Show. That was El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X, and you know it's funny the last photo that they honed into of our one of what Malcolm called the greatest revolutionaries to ever touch the continent of Africa, that being Patrice Lumumba. That tied into where we are right now. You know, African internationalism, anti-colonialism. Ajamu, what did that clip mean to you, and how does that work for us today? Because again, you know, I appreciate what you said earlier when Isaac posed the question around, you know, our involvement, because clearly our people think they're thinking that, you know, when it comes to ICE, it's like, oh, it's just about them. And then they see someone that they're familiar with. We just saw Jane from Loose Ends, the group Loose Ends, being deported. You know what I mean? And she's black as tomorrow. You know what I mean? So, you know, we look at it, we see jokes about ICE. We see folks talking about, well, I didn't see the Palestinians doing anything for us, and I didn't see the Iranians, where were they, so on and so forth. And of course, the question we have is, where were you when a lot of this shit was going down, and where were your people? How does this all tie in, and how important is it when it comes to African internationalism? Because I know that with Black Alliance for Peace, you all are not just going, you're not chasing fires. You're saying, okay, boom. You're reminding folks that I am an African, and as an African, I stand against oppression.
And that's absolutely the position that we take. That and that's not a radical position. It may sound radical today, and that's again because of the relative success that the enemy has had in shifting consciousness away from our connection to other oppressed people, to other colonized people, to a position in which people actually are embracing their so-called identity as so-called Americans. And we know what Malcolm said about that in terms of people who were confused about their so-called Americanness. But again, this is what the enemy does, and our responsibility is to analyze it, but not to fixate on it, but to begin to try to recapture our people. And that, of course, was and is the campaign, the objectives of this formation, the Black Alliance for Peace. We don't see this formation as the end all of everything that needs to be built. We saw this as a contribution to helping to revive a process of rebuilding the African left, and uniting our people, because we recognize, we saw the trajectory of politics in this country and globally, and we knew that the period that we're in today was in fact coming. And so we knew that we had a race to try to build as quickly as possible formations that could survive, that could sustain us, that could serve as incubation points, if you will, for redeveloping our revolutionary movement. And we're not the only ones. Others are doing the same thing. And what we have to do now is to begin to find a way to begin to concentrate and coordinate our various activities. One of the things that we've got to come to terms with, comrades, is this. The very fact that these forces can rationalize and justify an ongoing racist genocide, a live stream genocide of the racialized other, the Palestinians. That raises some significant questions for all of us. I take the position that basically in any of the questions that we are looking at, the people are calling for the so-called reforms. For me, Gaza has transformed everything. We can't have any more illusions about the extent to which the enemy is capable of. Okay, we all remember and know about when the enemy put its own Japanese citizens in concentration camps during the Second Imperialist War. The ideal that there's some kind of constraints or something similar happening to us as we intensify efforts at resistance is dangerously delusional. We are at war. The enemy understands the terms of struggle. The enemy has class and national consciousness, if you will. We are the ones that don't. We are the ones that think that, and this is going to be controversial, perhaps. We think that this enemy is going to, and for whatever reason, that they're going to give us or provide us some kind of individual reparations. It's not happening, Africans. It's not happening. I'm sorry. Newsflash. If these pigs can engage in the activity they're engaging in right now, why would they give Negroes in the U.S. anything? Okay? So what I'm suggesting is this. We still raise the contradictions of what, we suffered and what we did to build this colonial capitalist empire. But African, I'm gonna tell you something. I never, for 1 millisecond, ever thought that these pigs will provide so-called reparations. Your enemy can't repair you. If you want reparations, let's defeat this enemy. Let's build a new society. Let's have authentic African self-determination in our national territories. That's not going to happen with you investing in the sustainability of the current colonial capitalist state. And when I say that is what I mean by that is this. Inadvertently, in order for us to get our reparations, this particular state needs to continue.
Right.
That's a backward position, Africans. That's a backward position. So we say, we can't, well, I say, we can't play with this anymore. Okay? People say that the centerpiece of Black politics today is reparations. I reject that. And, people have to understand that, while it could have been progressive at one point, and it was, that political phenomenon can transform itself into its opposite. Okay? I tell my friends in Cobra, if y'all don't deal with the backwardness of ADOs and F.B.As that have basically kind of almost co-opted the issue, then basically it's going to be over because our people are confused and they're taking these un-African positions that, the assault on Latinos had nothing to do with them. The genocide, the racist rampage in Gaza has nothing to do with them. I saw a tweet yesterday. Someone said, "Well, the issue with all the money going to the attack on Iran is that's our reparations money." Nigga, you ain't getting no reparations.
Ajamu, man. You
tired
mean
of
tell
playing
me?
with it, Africa? I'm sorry.
No. If I can, I have felt crazy for saying these same exact things that you are saying right now. And so
you are crazy, Isaac. Don't get it twisted. Don't tell me you felt crazy.
I've spoken about this, and it's actually, it's crazy. It is crazy that this conversation kind of right now is happening because a comrade of mine, while you were talking, who we talked about this 2 years ago, who I'm getting ready to be meeting up with pretty soon. What you speak about again or at least what these individuals speak about, is reinforcing the capitalist mode. We cannot keep acting like our liberation, our sovereignty comes from a set number. If they give us, whether it's $350,000 a piece, whether it's $1.5 million a piece, this does not change the fact that we live under a capitalist imperialist mode that occupies, that exploits our African brothers and sisters abroad. See, this is where Kwame Nkrumah comes in really well, is that he gets you to really understand that, again, the African masses have been scattered across the globe and have been used to reinforce narratives, been used to exploit other individuals. And that's why we have the F.B.As and the ADOSs, because they've allowed the anti-intellectual model, the aesthetic, to be applied to them individually so that they then think on an individual anti-intellectual level. That is what's stopping and hindering us from being able to, as you just alluded to, Ajamu, getting our real reparations. Our real reparations were never connected to a dollar amount. We just seen other people get so-called reparations or a check for being exploited by an imperialist system, and them saying, "Hey, you ready to conform?" That sounds like a deposition to me. That's what it sounds like. And I'm not in the business, because liberation ain't a business. It's my life. I'm not in a business of trying to leverage my life to then keep capitalism afloat. When we put it in a barrel, decide to douse it with some kerosene and say, "Hey, the hell to it," that's when we can actually start to see the other side of what we actually should be striving for, which is true liberation and for the shackles of imperialism to be withered away from us all. We're in Gen Pop right now. We have political prisoners. We have elders that have sacrificed their damn life so that individuals like us could just breathe. Just breathe.
That's why look, there's certain conditions I would accept reparations. I would accept, give every Negro in the U.S. $5 million with the caveat that you got to take a one-way ticket out the U.S. and you can't come back. I support that. You know why? 95% of Negroes in the U.S. ain't gonna take it because they don't want to leave the plantation.
Right.
Okay, it ain't serious what you're saying. Look, you're absolutely correct. They're not prepared to undermine this system. They want to live off of the blood of our people and the blood and resources of people around the world. That's how the West has developed, and that's how it sustains itself. That's why the West is involved in this desperate attempt to try to maintain global hegemony. There's a parasitic relationship. And we're saying that the ultimate of our politics, if we want a piece of that, oh no, I don't want that. I don't want that. We're at the center of empire, an empire that is being sustained off the blood of our people. Our responsibility is to deal with that empire internally, in all the different ways that might imply. Okay, and so the confusion, the conservatism of a ideal that instead of us engaging in developing revolutionary politics, we're going to beg crackers for reparations. To me, is the ultimate expression of backwardness. Okay, so we not begging, we demanding. You ain't got no basis to demand. You disorganized.
Right.
You
So
know, and where is that coming from? So no, you know, look, and this
well,
this so
I was just gonna go, and this is where like, and I'm very bold today this morning, and I think you brought it out of me, Ajamu. So just want to say thank you. This is where like, people misconstrue, the mobilization organization, they try and use Touré's words to try and justify conservative ideology, trying to justify the conservative nature of what we see going on with F.B.A, ADOS. And so they'll say, Tariq Nasheed is a good mobilizer and a good organizer. No, he's a good manipulator. He's a good manipulator. He wouldn't be able to sell me a penny, even if he said he polished it. Even if he said to me, these individuals don't embody what I know to be true revolutionary aesthetics. They have not put in what would be classified or quoted as put in the work to be given a title like such. And even then, so those that are calling themselves revolutionaries and you ain't started a revolution, I highly question you. These are components in their names that are for individuals that have sacrificed their lives. And that is a big part, as to why we have mass indoctrination, is that people hear hear his name. I'm not going to say his name again because he'll appear like Beetlejuice. These individuals don't bring real aesthetics to liberation, and the only thing that they bring is a dream of a stimulus check that's equivalent to our ancestors, or you saying it's equivalent to our ancestors getting whipped 30,000 times in equivalents for getting $350,000, and then we're going to give them right back the money every single time. And we didn't really understand the components for which that got us here, the aesthetics that still are prevalent that we didn't fight against, we conformed with. So I'm gonna let Kalanji speak because Kalanji's like, it's crazy.
No. That's why I'm in the middle. You know what I'm saying? Kalanji's in the middle. You know what I'm saying? But I want to ask, because this is a very interesting segue. Again, you're checking out Black Power Media. This is the Rise Up International Morning Show, and we went through Zionism. We talked about Israeli-Iran conundrum, and getting into this whole scene of reparations. My piece, I think I have a two-part question. One, playing crackers advocate. I think the first thing, or Negro advocate. The first thing, what do we say, Ajamu, to because we're gonna have some folks in the chat, and probably already in the chat, talking about, well, my ancestors built this country and we was here first, and whoop the bam. That's one. But then two, we talk about this whole Trump dog shit. We you hear folks that are still stuck on the whole, if you'd have voted for Kamala, and see, this who we get when we didn't vote. I know you've seen that malarkey, which is low-hanging fruit, an excuse. It is we didn't really have a plan of action. So let's point the finger at folks who didn't vote or whatever the case is. So again, I know it's a broad question, but starting off with for the folks who saying that, the blood and everything of our ancestors built this and we was here, yada, yada, yada. And then the whole, my ancestors died for our right to vote. Your black ass didn't vote, or you voted third party. And, Kamala lost as if, her being in office would have made America great again. What's your thoughts on that, bro?
These are understandable questions and understandable positions. And actually, there's a certain degree of truth to that. The fact of the matter is that when Europeans spilled out of Europe beginning in 1492 into the what became the so-called Americas, that became the material foundation for the rise of what we refer to today as Western civilization. That includes also the settler colonial project of the United States of America. So that was the material basis. The conquering of the indigenous people, which meant the theft of their land, the importation of Africans to provide free labor. That became the material basis for what became the West. So there's no question about that. Understand, though, we're talking about stages in history. So the stage of primitive accumulation that took place in the Americas that led to the development of capitalism and capitalism as a global system was on the base of the exploitation of the labor of the Africans. No question about that. But understand this: once the Europeans completed their march across the continental territory that became the United States of America, from sea to shining sea, from the East Coast to the West Coast, they then were able to then go beyond the continental U.S. In 1898 and begin and continue the accumulation process in developing themselves into a global empire. So this foundation is real. But understand this: the foundation and the expansion of European power was based not just on the exploitation and the oppression of the African, but by the end of the 19th century, it was the European powers that had colonized the entire planet. Okay, so we all have a material basis in fighting against this oppressive and backward colonial capitalist system. Okay, so the question becomes today: what is the principal position we should be taking as oppressed African people? And we say that the principal position has to be to oppose our enemy, to oppose the continuation of this concentrated structure called white supremacy, this colonial capitalist system, this pan-European colonial capitalist white supremacist patriarchy. Okay, that is the focus of our attention. Not begging for, or not even asking for some type of so-called reparations. Is about understanding our historic responsibility. So yes, we helped build this thing, but the basis of it was also the continuation of it was also the systematic exploitation of peoples and resources around the world. And so the question for us becomes: it's a political question. What side do you stand on? Do you side with the enemy? Can the enemy buy you off with some so-called reparations? Or do you continue to stand with the oppressed people of the world? Are you committed to building a new kind of society in which what we went through and others went through, we can eliminate? I stand with a revolutionary position that basically we've got to take power away from this European colonial capitalist system if we have any hope of being able to exist on this planet. Understand this for Kamala. Kamala and the Democrats are pigs. There's bipartisan agreement on all of the major questions, including Palestine, including the attack on Iran. There was no other party as rabid in their opposition to Iran than the Democrats. Okay, so there's no difference. And then people talk about, well, Trump and his abuse of the Constitution and all of this. Look, come on, look. These folks both parties are ignoring their own laws. The very fact that that the Israelis can't be allowed to use U.S. weapons in the violation of human rights contradicts U.S. law. But nobody cares about that. The fact that the Trump administration can engage in a choice, to engage in a war of choice, an aggressive war against Iran. Some people raise it up the question of the constitutionality of that, but for the most part, they don't care. Okay, this is a bipartisan enemy. This is a ruling class that has its own interests at heart, and they are prepared to use by any means necessary to maintain and to perpetuate and expand their hegemony if they can. Okay, and we've got to be clear. Let me say this too. Now, we don't want people to get confused. My position on the contemporary questions or even contradictory nature of the reparation issue is mine, Ajamu Baraka, not any other organization that I'm affiliated with. Okay, we don't have a position on that officially. I'm suggesting that this issue has to be rethought. Is now transformed itself into the opposite. Okay, and we just got to be serious about that. We understand this current lawlessness we see with the attack on Iran. This is the beginning of a new sustained war. This notion that Trump thought that they can go in, bomb the nuclear facilities, leave, and then call for peace is absurd. The Iranians are going to resist, and what's going to happen is it's going to draw in the entire region. The Russians and the Chinese cannot allow Iran to be defeated. The Chinese get 15% of their oil from Iran. Okay, they are not going to allow themselves to be picked off one by one by this crazed fascist government in the U.S. utilizing and using, working through its crazed fascist ally and so-called Israel. These are the terms, Africans. These folks are waging war against all of us. And so we've got to understand that and reject some of the confusion that we have internally. You got these Afro-pessimists, led by this Frank Wilderson. I call him Frank Weirdenson, because it disarms all of us. It undermines our ability to build anti-colonial coalitions. Because we're so concerned about, are they pretending, thinking that the Latinos are racist, the Arab, everybody's racist, okay? Look, if they don't want us to marry their daughter, whatever, I don't care. Do we have the basis of building a united front for power to defeat this common enemy, okay? But we get hung up on all this other BS, and basically we're being picked off one by one. And all this comes from these weird ideological positions coming out of academia with these petty bourgeois so-called intellectuals, okay? They seeps itself into our movements. So no, this is serious times, Africans. We can't play with this. Because these folks are serious, and we've got to build serious organizations and build a serious movement and eject all of the illusions that we have, all of the sentimentality about how things should be. You can't go forward, backing up. We understand and we look at, things that we have built in the past, but you can't reason by analogy. Okay, studying the past and how we did things in the past is important. Understand this: what guides that analysis is conjunctural analysis, understanding the balance and coalition of forces in a particular historical moment. That helps you to understand, or try to understand, the objective conditions you are facing today, the objective and subjective conditions. Cabral says, understand understand the structure, understand your society. Okay, that's the only way you can go forward. You've got to develop revolutionary theory to guide effective revolutionary practice. Okay, that means a focus on the realities as you understand them, or try to understand them up to date. That's the task. Okay, we can't play with this stuff, and I think it's too many people are still playing.
Yeah, it's a game of anti-intellectual behavior that's being exhibited. And I just want to say thank you for bringing it up, because the time is now more than ever for us to come together, for us to strategize, for us to mobilize, understand what these words even mean to begin with, because we have a large fluctuate of people that don't. My question, and I hope you have enough time to be able to answer it, and for whatever else Kalanji, whatever question Kalanji has. What is to be done now? We on this network had you on when we had called for a united front against fascism with Elder Daruba bin Wahad, brother of yours, along with Cornel West, Jill Stein, Claudia de la Cruz. What is to be done right now for that to actually be a reality? It was called then. It really wasn't brung up any further past that conversation, and so that's why I'm kind of hoping that what you're saying is emulating that. We need that more than ever. Not that there hasn't been one in the past, but we need a strong united front against fascism in a way that we haven't seen before.
Very, very important question. And I have 15 more minutes till 11:15 your time. I think that there's stages. And the first stage in developing a united front is the consolidation of a Black left constituency that's clear on what needs to be built. It's even clear on the question of fascism, because even among ourselves, when we talk about fascism, we have this sort of Trump syndrome, in which people are believe that the fascism only started in January of this year with the ascendancy of Donald Trump. As you all know on this show, some of us have been making the argument for quite some time, for a few years now, 7, 8 years, that the leading edge of neo-fascism in the U.S. is not emanating from those forces outside the state, represented by insurgent forces like the Trumpian MAGA movement, but that the leading edge of fascism in the U.S. is emanating from the neoliberal Democrat Party, where the class forces have consolidated into a classical definition of fascism in the metropole. And we make that distinction between the manifestation of fascism in the metropole, in the center, versus fascism or colonial fascism in the peripheries, in the colonies. Because in the colonies, we have been subjected to fascism from the very beginning, okay? In the metropole, this terroristic coordination between the state and the corporate sector under the hegemony of international finance capital, that is the classic example of fascism. Is a class structure. It is what I call a capitalist reform, okay? It's when you have this intensified crisis of capitalism, where the state form of liberal democracy is now ineffective. And basically you have to move now to a more explicit totalitarian situation, where basically all of the so-called democratic and human rights under liberal democracy, you have to jettison, because you can no longer afford it. You've got to tighten the ship, if you will. So when we oppose the Biden war in Ukraine, then the Uhuru 3 and the African People's Socialist Party find themselves under a federal indictment, and all the rest of us are being labeled as Russian agents or whatever, because we're saying this truly is not our war to a certain extent. That basically this is a manifestation of a desperate attempt on the part of capital to undermine the Russian Federation, to disconnect the European economy from the Russian economy, to do what? To open up the space for the insertion of energy interests coming from the U.S. Anyway, so these things, to us represent the real interest. That basically is not a behavior thing that is about looking for behavior that mirrors our understanding of fascism from bad Hitler movies. Fascism is a structural element, is a class element, okay? And so this consolidation, if you will, that's happening, a convergence of a political convergence of the fascists that are the neoliberals and the MAGA movement, is a very dangerous development. But the impetus of it is coming from neoliberalism. Why do you think that the Trump forces now are being criticized by their own base for betraying the MAGA movement, betraying what Trump pretended to be opposed to, which was the endless imperialist wars? You got to remind people the little bit that Trump did during his first administration, he governed not as a MAGA, he governed as a neoliberal because he was constrained. That's the only way he could, in fact, govern. He has come in the second term. I knew it was going to happen. I've been a little bit surprised that it happened in 5 months. That now he's governing again, in essence, as a neoliberal globalist. They are opposed to the globalist agenda, but this is what we see with the attack on Iran. That basically this is the globalist agenda, and they are now going to be bogged down again in another so-called endless war. So we got to be clear about what's really happening, Africans, because if we find ourselves talking about sitting out a struggle, allowing these folks to consolidate themselves domestically with their cop cities and all of the repressive apparatus they have, and a sharpening for us, and then when it comes to us, we be looking for allies, but because we're so black, we may not have too many people coming to our assistance.
I'm glad you mentioned so black, quote unquote, because some of the same folks, when it comes to the alliance of the Sahel states, they're mute as well. So they're talking about, what's going on here and all of this type stuff and where was they, so on and so forth. And in real time, you have the Sahel region on fire. I want to ask you, how important is the alliance of the Sahel states right now in regards to this puzzle of warfare and domination and so on and so forth that's taking place both domestically and internationally? Isaac mentioned a united front against fascism, and I think the Sahel states is a great model to look at. Wanted to know your thoughts in regards to what's taking place there and how important it is it during this particular time period.
It is vitally important. It represents symbolically a new stage in the struggle for African liberation on the continent. Okay, that basically what we have with this alliance is a revival, if you will, of revolutionary Pan-Africanism. But understand this, as important as this process is still relatively fragile. And that's why it's so vitally important that people understand this alliance, understand its potentiality, but also understand the array of forces against it. And that's why, for example, we are still intensifying our work, meaning the Black Alliance for Peace, in demanding the ejection of the U.S. Africa Command from Africa. And this is in alignment with the ejection of the French forces from these states and from the African continent. And we are saying that any NATO activity on the African continent has to be identified and rejected. That's why we have some of our activists right now, as we speak, in The Hague, attending and agitating at this anti-NATO conference. Okay, because we're making all of these connections. And if there's Europeans who are opposed to NATO, and there's a basis of us having some kind of alignment with those forces, that's exactly what we do, because we're building an international movement, and we're centering the interests of African people. So yes, to the extent that we continue to educate people on the importance of this, that's our task and our responsibility, because we've got to be able to protect these states. They are engaged in a very precarious struggle right now, because, symbolically, the enemy understands what would be the result if they were able to undermine this unity process. As we talk about today, this alignment, there's a meeting with the Negro leadership from the they are Negroes from the African states, the African comprador bourgeoisie, with the U.S. Talking about ways in which they can strengthen their relationships between the African states, the African bourgeois states, and the U.S. You know, so again, this contrast represents the terms of struggle. You know, the potential revolutionary process with the alliance and the Negroes, Uncle Tom, comprador bourgeoisie in these various states, African states, that need to be overthrown. Okay, the same thing with the neo-colonial petty bourgeois that controls, that are the administrators of the natives in these major urban areas in the United States of America. This black misleadership class, this neo-colonial class. You know, we can't get to the system, comrades, because we have to go through these buffers, these class buffers. And then people tell us, oh, you know, class struggle is a European concept. Because you're a clown. That's why you believe that. Because you have no theoretical understanding of what it is you're up against and what shaped your reality. Okay? If you don't understand the fact that the bourgeoisie has class consciousness, that's why despite their internal contradictions and conflicts of interest, they can unite themselves against us, then, you know, you're missing the boat. You know, that basically they understand that they're at war. You know, while you sit it out. You know, this ain't got nothing to do with us. Comrades, we can't afford this level of confusion. And we got to confront it directly. We can't play with it. We can't talk about, oh, that's where the masses are at. Yeah, the masses are in different places. But then what are we doing to move the masses forward? You know? And it ain't the masses who ain't ready for a revolutionary program. It's the Negroes who call themselves organizers who ain't ready. They don't want to talk about what really needs to be done. They really don't.
Yeah. Last question.
I'm gonna blow it all out. I don't care. I'm on your hey, and you're all used to this. Fuck it.
This probably gonna be the last show of the Rise. I'm joking.
First off, again, thank you for again pointing out and making the African masses aware of these very fratricidal contradictions that we have amongst ourselves. My question to you is, and it's just a very quick and small question, is to what we call here our uprisers. They're the people who we watch every single day. They watch us. We tune in just as much as they do. What do you say to these individuals moving forward as to the primary goal for Africans in the wake of, you know, seeing Trump consistently put not just himself, and it's not just him. I have to reiterate, it is a class collaborated effort, and I want to, you know, piggyback off of what you said, and it's actually something that Gerald Horne, you know, has alluded in his books, is that these are class collaborated efforts that go back to 1492. They go back to the class collaborated counter revolution of 1776, the counter revolution of 1836. These are all class collaborated efforts. So it wasn't new or surprising to see, you know, it happen where we seen 77 plus million people, you know, put their vote, you know, in. And I've always stated, because I know and am aware of Citizens United versus FCC, that we have corporations that win these elections. We have corporations that leverage these elections, which makes it harder and harder and harder for trying to, through their own, you know, laws and their own, you know, constraints, make liberation possible for us Africans. What would you say to the uprisers just moving forward, being that, you know, we're in a time period where literally anything can happen, you know, but what is the primary goal that Africans here, the uprisers, should be focusing on?
Organization and political clarity, and understanding of the class contradictions, and understanding of the connection between the struggles that we're waging in this national territory with the overall global system of imperialism. We've got to be clear politically, Africans, and that's part of our that's the main thrust, I think, of our struggle. And I know the call for organization can sound like a cliche, but basically, if we're not organized at every level, if we don't have a powerful, independent organizations engaged in all of the objective material needs of our people, we're not going to be able to survive this period of open fascism. Okay, so understand, and you can't get organized properly unless you have a political understanding of the objective realities. Okay, so yes, it's struggling for clarity. It's building more effective formations. Okay, and is engaging in ruthless critique and ruthless criticism, because we can't afford the continuation of nonsense. You know, and when I come back the next time, I have another issue that I want to deal with, and people don't want to touch, but we got to deal with it, and that is this popularity, this new popularity of these horizontalists, these black anarchists, and the kind of confusion that they are bringing into our movement. We understand the attraction of it is a very attractive framework for the black petty bourgeoisie. You can keep your individualism and your lack of accountability to anybody. You can critique and criticize those of us who are the so-called tankies and hierarchical folks, whatever. But we believe you got to have a organization that's still and structured if you're going to survive. And so there's real confusion out here with some of this stuff, and that has to be confronted also directly eventually.
I'm glad that you bring that up because there is confusion. A lot of individuals conflate what they would say is anarchism, which really is chaos. And so I'd love to be a part of that conversation and to wage, unfortunately, a mild debate. I'd love to have with you on this. I will not call you a tanky because you're not a tanky, but nonetheless, I will say that there are some things that I think me and you potentially might disagree on, and I'd love to debate that in a very, very, very dialectical way. I think that it's
exactly needed. A very comradely way. That's what we're talking about.
Yes.
Cool.
You're would be considered an elder to me. So we come from different generations.
You're going to say old. I am old.
I think he was going to say that. He said that same shit to me, Ajamu. So I said, yeah, as one of my elders. Anyway, we could have Isaac's disagreeable ass and you back on sometime next week. We'll set that, because I think it is a very important conversation, because again, coming from a position of a need for organization and a need for accountability is tantamount, because I think that oftentimes, God damn it, I can't even talk right now. Anarchism. Anyway, I can't even get my words right now. I think that
maybe that means something. But anyway.
Yeah, it might. I'm just I'm just stuck on all of this, but it's I think that folks look for whatever particular out that they can, without understanding the true nature of what it is they're supposed to be doing. But we definitely appreciate you coming on board today, Ajamu, and we appreciate Miko for laying out the history of Zionism, for this discussion around this Israeli Iran conundrum, which will continue. As the Iranians stated the other day, expect a response. And,
exactly.
And I thought that those are some bad words to hear. You know what I'm saying? When the motherfucker tell you to expect a response, I come from a family of few words. You know what I mean? I might talk a lot, as Chairman Fred would say, because I want to make sure that we're clear about what's going on. We try to give you an out, and I think that's what political education is all about. Sometimes we need clarity as to how we're going to get down or how we're getting down, so that folks won't be confused into thinking that, you're just doing this because of that. No, we're doing this. We're sticking our foot up in your ass because of the fact that you violated, and this is how you violated. So even the folks that are around you, once they're clear about why we had to step in your back pocket or do our dance in your chest, that it was done from a principle perspective and not just an emotional or a personality situation or whatever way folks like to sum shit up when they operating off of bullshit. So again, we appreciate you coming on last minute and looking forward to more conversations right here on Black Power Media. Isaac, great job as always, being a young gun talking your shit. We will definitely look forward to more of the Rise Up International Morning Show. Y'all stay tuned, like, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. Until next time, we out.
Sometimes the riot is a quiet one, where the battle is to love yourself and function in society, where voices of reason are muted by anxiety, like gaining notoriety is selling your soul. So we tend to go no deeper than the shallow water level, trying to keep us overhead in the face of all the slurs and the stares, until they frozen, paralyzed by fear of failure and success. So we lock, stock, barrel, running while it's crumbling. All these towers and they're babbling, but the baby's in the bath and a stash under the bed on my head, spinning from the circles and the puppets and the strings that they pull. Then we move. Reactionary warfare never produces winners on the field. Feeble and foolish, what tools and what weapons are we using? We need some new ones. Real revolution, it's real solutions. What we've taken on the ways of the ones who conquer with their guns and religion and division. Got my inner me looking like my enemy. Real revolution, where my inner me really a mirror for the galaxy. New time, brand new paradigms, new contracts to sign. They thought that this would all be televised, though it's happening right before our very eyes. It's on the inside, with their guns cocked. When that rock drops, standing on the rooftop, praying that the mountaintop can live inside the valley. People tell me the reward is somewhere off in heaven, like heaven's only in the sky. Like chariots are swinging, like God is something separate from yourself, from your wealth, from your lover, from your neighbor. Oh, your savior is coming in your own name, coming with the face the same. Real revolution, it's real solutions. Where we've taken on the ways of the ones who conquer with their guns and religion and division. Got my inner me looking like my enemy. Real revolution, where my enemy is really a mirror for the galaxy.